Hello, my dear friends. Welcome to Daily English Story. Today we're going to dive into the thrilling story of Alexander the Great, a man who conquered half the known world by the age of 32. From a tiny kingdom in ancient Greece, Alexander the Great led his armies across vast continents, forging an empire so grand it reshaped the world's borders, cultures, and dreams forever. But how did one young man achieve so much in such a short time? What sparked his unstoppable ambition? Let's step back in time and discover the incredible journey that began with a boy and his horse. Alexander was only about 12 years old when a huge black horse was brought before his father, King Philip of Macedon. The horse was beautiful, powerful, but completely wild. It kicked, it neighed, it bit. None of the king's soldiers could ride it. Philip was ready to send the horse away, but young Alexander stepped forward. He said, "Father, the horse is only afraid of its own shadow." Everyone laughed. What could a boy know about such a beast? But Alexander insisted. He turned the horse toward the sun so it could no longer see its shadow. Then slowly, calmly, he mounted the animal. The horse ran. It galloped with terrifying speed. But Alexander held firm. He guided it. He controlled it. He became one with it. When he returned, the court was silent. Philip embraced him and said, "My son, you must find a kingdom big enough for your ambitions. Macedonia is too small for you." That horse, named Bucephalus, became Alexander's lifelong companion, carrying him into battle after battle. And in that moment, the world began to see that this boy was not ordinary. As a boy, Alexander wasn't just learning swordsmanship or riding. He was reading. His tutor was the great philosopher Aristotle, who filled his head with stories of Homer's Iliad. Alexander loved one hero above all, Achilles, the warrior who chose glory over a long, quiet life. He would walk around with a copy of the Iliad, even sleeping with it under his pillow. But here's the conflict. Achilles was a legend, untouchable, almost a god. Alexander, he was just a prince, small in a rough, dangerous world. People wondered, could this boy ever match the greatness he worshipped? He whispered to himself, "I will not only equal Achilles, I will surpass him." That dream would burn in his heart for the rest of his life. At 16, while his father Philip was away at war, Alexander was left in charge of Macedonia. Many thought, he's too young, he will fail. But suddenly, a neighboring tribe rebelled. The chance had come to prove himself or be remembered as a boy who couldn't hold power. Alexander didn't hide. He raised an army, marched to battle, and crushed the rebels. He didn't just win, he built a city on their land and named it Alexandropolis after himself. Imagine that. While most teenagers were still dreaming, Alexander was already building cities with his name on them. The message was clear. He was no longer just the king's son. He was a leader. But the greatest conflict was inside his own home. King Philip was a brilliant general, but he was also ambitious, ruthless, and unfaithful. Tension grew between father and son. Alexander often felt ignored, overshadowed, even humiliated. At Philip's wedding to a new wife, one of the king's men insulted Alexander, saying, "Now the king will have a true heir." Alexander, furious, threw his cup and shouted, "Am I a bastard then?" Philip, drunk, tried to draw his sword but stumbled to the floor. Alexander looked down at him and mocked. Here is the man who plans to conquer the world, yet he cannot even rise from his own bed." The court was shocked. Father and son were on the edge of war with each other. And then, suddenly, Philip was assassinated. Alexander was only 20 years old. The crown fell onto his head. Now the boy who dreamed of Achilles would have to prove himself, not in stories but in blood and battle. Alexander had just become king. Greece was restless. Enemies whispered, "He is too young, and he cannot lead." To prove them wrong, Alexander marched into Asia with an army of 40,000. At the Granicus River, Persian satraps waited with their cavalry, confident this boy king would drown in his first war. Alexander's generals begged him, "Do not attack today. The river is too dangerous. Wait." But Alexander refused. He shouted, "I will not steal victory, I will earn it," and charged across the river with his men. The Persians attacked fiercely. Alexander's helmet was struck. His sword broke. A Persian noble raised an axe to split his skull, but at the last second, a loyal soldier cut the attacker down. Alexander survived, drenched in blood and mud, but victorious. The world now knew the boy was a warrior. But one victory wasn't enough. The true test came at Issus, where the great Persian king Darius III himself appeared with an army far larger than Alexander's. When Darius saw Alexander, he threw a spear, nearly hitting him. But Alexander didn't flinch. He led his cavalry straight into the heart of the Persian line, aiming not at soldiers but at Darius himself. The Persians broke. Darius fled the battlefield in his chariot, leaving behind his mother, wife, and children. That night, Alexander entered Darius's tent. Gold, jewels, silk, treasures beyond imagination. But instead of stealing, he treated Darius's captured family with honor. And here lies the conflict. Was Alexander just a conqueror? Or did he believe truly that he was building something greater? A new world where enemies became allies. Then came Gaugamela, the battle that would decide the fate of empires. Darius returned, this time with perhaps 1,000,000 men, war elephants and scythed chariots. The Persians stretched across the horizon like an endless wave. Alexander's army was outnumbered at least 5-1. His men looked at him nervously. Some whispered, "This is madness. We cannot win." But Alexander stood before them and said, "The enemy is not stronger, they are only more numerous. Victory comes not from numbers, but from courage." When the battle began, Alexander waited for the perfect moment. Then he led a wedge of cavalry slicing through the Persian line like lightning, aiming once again for Darius. The Persian king panicked and fled. The great Persian Empire, built over centuries, collapsed in a single day. At just 25 years old, Alexander was now the ruler of half the known world. After Gaugamela, Alexander walked into Babylon, the richest city on earth. Gold palaces, gardens, it was all his. People bowed before him, calling him King of Asia. But Alexander wanted more. He said, "I am not just a king, I am chosen by the gods." His soldiers began to worry. They had followed him because he was one of them, a leader who ate with them, bled with them. But now, was he drifting away? Still, Alexander pushed further east, through deserts, across mountains, chasing the idea of a world united under one ruler. When he reached Persia's heart, he did something no Greek king had ever done. He married Roxana, a Persian princess. Not only that, he forced thousands of his soldiers to marry Persian women as well. To Alexander, it was a symbol. Greeks and Persians, no longer enemies, but one family. To his men, it was betrayal. They whispered, "Is he still Greek? Or is he trying to become Persian himself?" The seeds of doubt began to grow. Still, Alexander would not stop. He led his army into India, where rains flooded the land and elephants charged like living tanks. At the Battle of the Hydaspes River, Alexander faced King Porus, a giant man said to be over 2 meters tall. His elephants terrified the Greeks, trampling men underfoot, but Alexander adapted. He split his army, attacked from the flanks, and after a brutal fight, he captured Porus alive. When asked how he wished to be treated, Porus said simply, "Like a king." Alexander, impressed, spared him and even gave him more land. The boy who once burned to conquer was now learning the power of respect. But at last his own soldiers broke. On the banks of the Ganges River, Alexander planned to march deeper into India. The men, exhausted and far from home, stood silent. Then they spoke, "We will go no further." For the first time in his life, Alexander could not win. He begged. He offered rewards. He even wept. But his army stayed firm. At last, Alexander turned back. He had conquered everything he could, except the hearts of men who only wanted to go home. On the way back from India, Alexander chose the hardest path, the Gedrosian desert. Endless sand, burning heat, no water. His soldiers collapsed under the sun. Horses died. Supplies ran out. Some said Alexander chose this route to prove that nothing, not even nature, could stop him. But the cost was terrible. Thousands perished. When at last they emerged, the men were alive but broken. On the way back from India, Alexander chose the hardest path, the Gedrosian desert. Endless sand, burning heat, no water. His soldiers collapsed under the sun. Horses died, supplies ran out. Some said Alexander chose this route to prove that nothing, not even nature, could stop him. But the cost was terrible. Thousands perished. When at last they emerged, the men were alive but broken. In June 323 BCE, after a night of heavy drinking, Alexander fell sick. Some said it was malaria. Others whispered poison. For days he grew weaker, unable to speak. His soldiers, desperate, filed past his bed. Too weak to rise, Alexander raised only his hand in silent farewell. Then, at just 32 years old, the conqueror of the world was gone. After his death, his generals fought each other, tearing the empire apart. No one man could hold what Alexander had built, and yet his legacy lived on. Greek ideas, art, and science spread across Asia. Cities he founded, like Alexandria in Egypt, became centers of learning for centuries. But the question remained, was Alexander a hero who united the world or a tyrant who destroyed it? If this story inspired you, please give it a like, share it with a friend who loves learning, and subscribe to Daily English Story. Together we can grow in wisdom and improve our English one story at a time.